So we're going to learn about wrapper classes now. And with wrapper classes, these are classes that take primitive types in Java and make them objects. The reason to have them is not going to be super clear yet, but later in the course, we're going to have things, structures like linked lists and array lists, where they're collections of objects and you can't put primitive types in them. So you can't have an array list of ints or an array list of doubles, lower, like small, small I, small d. So we have wrapper classes for these that turn them into objects. And basically, it changes something like, if you have int x equals 17, then x refers to a memory location that is the bits that store the value 17. Integer x equals 17, then x is a reference variable. So x stores an address, and at that address, the value 17 is stored. As I said, the reason behind them will become apparent later in the class, but for right now, we're just going to talk about how you use them, starting with how you construct these objects. So we can say like integer x equals new integer 17, but we can also do integer y equals 17. And those two things will both create integer objects with a value of 17. This is called autoboxing, where it takes the primitive type 17 and puts it in an integer wrapper class inside the box. So it makes it into an integer. And there are some methods available in the integer and double wrapper classes that you need to know about. So we have, if you say integer p equals new integer 234, right? Well, that is using the constructor integer. That's right up there. So you can pass it a primitive type value, and it'll create the integer object. Integer dot min value and integer dot max value. These are static variables. They're not methods, they're static variables of the class, and it just gives you the minimum value that it's possible to represent by an int or an integer, and the maximum value that it's possible to represent an int or an integer in. And then we have the int value method. So we can say like int a equals p dot int value, and it gives you the int value for that integer. If we have double x equals new double 34.25, then double y equals x dot double value will give you the value of that as a primitive double. So those are the methods, and they're pretty straightforward. I wanted to reference two things that are not part of the subset but are really really useful with these wrapper classes, in particular with integer and double. There are two static methods. So if you can say integer dot parseInt or let's look at it. Let's look at the way I'll do it this way. Let's say you have a string s equals the string 173. Okay? It'd be useful if you could convert 173 as a string into the number 173. Let's say you're reading this from a file, so you're reading it as a collection of characters, but you know that it's supposed to be an integer. Well, we can say int a equals integer.parseInt of s, and that will make a 173. And there's also a double dot parse double that takes a string value. So if we said double b equals double dot parse double of s, then b is going to be 173.0. Those are useful. Now I want to talk a little bit more. I talked about boxing, auto boxing, and unboxing. Basically, since Java 5 or 6, you've been able to go back and forth between the ints and integers and doubles in this way. So you could say integer x equals 17, and it will automatically create an integer of that. And I can say, integer y equals new integer 17, and I can say integer z equals new integer x, and those will all three have a value of 17. If I do if x equals y, print x equals y, that's not going to print out because these are objects, so they're pointing at two different memory locations. The same values stored at those two different memory locations, but they're two different memory locations, so equals won't work. But I can say int a equals x, b equals y. So now I have two ints, a and b. They both have a value of 17. And if I say if a equals b, system.out.println a equals b will print out a equals b. Those are equal because they're primitives. And if x equals a, actually let me do this. If x equals b, What do you think happens there? Well, it does in fact print out. X equals B. Because on the fly there's a primitive there, so it's going to take X and treat X as a primitive just for that line. So we'll automatically, if you assign an integer value to an int or an int value to an integer, the computer handles it automatically and you don't actually have to use any methods of the class. So that's the basics of wrapper classes.